of the world isn't most people's favorite topic. A couple of weeks ago, Deacon Paul admitted that when he had to preach from the readings of the book of Daniel and the Gospel of Mark. Many of us are disturbed by the graphic images and the violent clashes at the end of the world, as told by the book of Revelation, and even Jesus' preaching in today's gospel. Nations will be in dismay. People will die of fright. The powers of heaven will be shaken. Not really the words of bedtime stories. Not really the thoughts that we might want to begin Advent with as we prepare ourselves to celebrate the birth of Christ. But Advent is the season that we deliberately set aside to contemplate the end of the world. It's the time when our fundamental prayer is, "Come, Lord Jesus, come." Now, as we consider the end of the world, we should realize that there are essentially two different visions of the end in the Bible. Most of us actually like the visions of the end times preached by prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah. Who could object to Jeremiah's words in today's first reading? "In those days, in that time, I will raise up for David a just shoot. He shall do what is right and just. In those days, Judah shall be safe, and Jerusalem shall dwell secure." Or Isaiah's most famous vision, "Then the wolf shall be the guest of the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid. The calf and the young lion shall browse together, with a little child to guide them. The cow and the bear shall be neighbors. Together their young shall rest. The lion shall eat hay like the ox. The baby shall play at the cobra's den, and the child lay his hand on the adder's lair. There shall be no harm or ruin on all my holy mountain." Now, that's an end of the world I can live with. The prophets offered their vision of the end time when Israel's kings were failing the people, and Israel's people were failing the Lord. And so the prophets preached a time of peace and tranquility and justice as a way of giving the people hope that eventually everything would work out in the end. The prophets envisioned this end as a natural progression of history, so that if the people would just remain faithful, eventually history would reach its intended end. Peace and justice and unity with God and with one another. We call that view of the end time the prophetic view. The other view of the end time we call the apocalyptic view. This is the view that we find in the books of Daniel and Revelation, and in the preaching of John the Baptist and Jesus himself. It uses graphic and dramatic imagery. It envisions a great and violent conflict between good and evil. It's downright frightening. Now, to understand apocalyptic visions, it's important to know that unlike the prophetic vision, the apocalyptic vision developed during times of persecution and oppression. The book of Daniel, for example, was written after the invasion and occupation of Israel by Alexander the Great, whose armies tortured and forced the Israelites to give up their Jewish ways and adopt Greek ways instead. John the Baptist and Jesus, as well as St. John, who wrote the book of Revelation, all preached at a time when the Romans persecuted the people. First the Jews, and then later the Christians. Like the prophets, the apocalyptic writers and preachers envision everything ending in God, where all shall be one. They just get there by a different route. Drawing on their own experience of persecution, apocalyptic writers see things as so bad and getting worse that the only way for everything to end in God is for God to suddenly break into history and intervene with a great battle between good and evil. Ultimately, God brings history to an end, and God and his faithful servants live victoriously forever. And here's the key part. In apocalyptic visions, the bad guys get theirs in the end. Far from frightening a persecuted people, apocalyptic visions of the end time would have satisfied and comforted them for being faithful to God. God reigns victoriously with them, and their persecutors are punished without mercy. And if you're an oppressed people, that vision is indeed good news. As a historical matter, apocalyptic preaching has long captured the imagination of African Americans, much more so than European Americans. And there's a reason for that. Apocalyptic writers, and in particular Jesus himself, call us to step back and look at the big picture. They recognize that things are going badly for the people, and so they invite them to look at life from a different perspective, a perspective from God's point of view, when God will reign with those who are faithful, if only the faithful can hold on. Jesus' preaching about the end of the world would have actually brought comfort to his listeners. When these signs begin to happen, he tells them, stand erect and raise your heads, because your redemption is at hand. This would have been an extraordinary message of hope to his listeners, and it gives me goosebumps every time I hear it. But Jesus also has to warn his listeners about the time before the end. Beware that your hearts do not become drowsy, he warns them, because he knows that oppressed people often grow weary from their oppression. He knows that burdened individuals often look for ways to relieve their pain and anxiety, causing their hearts to become drowsy from carousing and drunkenness and the anxieties of daily life. But essentially, Jesus' message is one of hope, and his listeners would have heard it that way. There are many ways in which we experience oppression in our world today. There's the oppression that comes from the evil of terrorism, the horror of people who are hell-bent to destroy the lives of others, who show no sign of care or decency to their fellow human beings, who instill fear in those around them so that they can manipulate the world to their own liking. There's the oppression that comes from a volatile economy, the anxiety and uncertainty about keeping a job and maintaining a steady stream of income, the struggle with paying the bills and the need to choose which bills to pay this month and which ones to hold for another. The harsh reality of a country in which a handful are becoming wealthier and wealthier, while most are just trying to keep their heads above water. Then there's the oppression that comes from racism. A racism that disrespects an entire people and denies them the opportunities that others take for granted. A racism that holds the minority in fear and distrust of the majority. A racism that is so ingrained in society that the majority can't even see it at work. And when we face these evils in our world, we have to remember that evil does not give up willingly. Evil does not let go easily. Evil does not go quietly. Evil will hold on until we can pry its grip loose, until we can cast its power out, until we can rid our world of its presence once and for all. So that when the goodness of God confronts the evil of this world, we should expect a nasty scene, a bitter fight, a powerful conflagration. Nations will be in dismay. People will die of fright, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. But when these things happen, stand erect and raise your heads, because your redemption is at hand. It might not conclude with the end of the world, but let's be honest. If the world were to end today, would that be such a terrible thing? Would the prospect of crushing evil once and for all and casting its perpetrators into the fiery abyss be such a horrible fate? Would living victoriously with God and our loved ones for all eternity be such an awful future? Well, not for me, church. For this is the hope that Jesus offers in today's gospel. And this is the cry that we make throughout all of Advent. Come, Lord Jesus, come. And then we will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And if he doesn't come to bring the world to an end, he will come to bring our hearts the strength they need to survive in his love. So that every time we confront the evil in our world and still hold firm to our faith, every time we refuse to give in to evil's grip and still reach out to others in love, every time we refuse to strike out and still receive the love of others into our lives, the Lord Jesus answers our cry. Come, Lord Jesus, come. This is our Advent hope. This is our Advent cry. This is our Advent prayer. In a world of terror and greed and oppression, church, stand erect and raise your heads, because your redemption is at hand. Pray that you have the strength to escape the tribulations that are imminent and to stand before the Son of Man. For Jesus is coming. He is coming with power and great glory. He is coming to gather us to himself, and he is coming to bring this world to an end. Welcome to Advent.